session today is covering off DSG and other grants or funding streams that are currently going into the sector this year and also for next year as well. For the first 2 or 3 slides, we're just going to cover very briefly an overview of the main funding streams that are currently being paid to the sector. Hopefully the vast majority of these will look familiar to you all. There's not a lot here that's going to cause any big surprises. For that reason, I won't go into a lot of detail on each individual grant funding stream as we're going along, but I will just draw attention to 1 or 2 on each slide that are of particular note for various reasons. So on this slide, just to quickly reference the last grant you can see there, which is Teachers Pension Employer Contribution Grant. So it's just to make the point that in the case of TPAG for 23-24 financial year, this funding for early years has been rolled into hourly rates for the early years entitlements funding for 3- and 4-year-olds. And for maintained nursery schools, their share of TPAG has been allocated through their supplementary funding, which means that we'll continue to pay sixth forms and 16 to 19 schools TPAG as per the grant, and that's on the basis that they're not funded through national funding formula or core allocations. Arrangements for DSG and pupil premium are hopefully arrangements you're familiar with. On the next slide, just to pick out a few grants there, just to reference very quickly. So for universal infant free school meals that we have there, the allocations and the conditions of grant for 23-24 are now published. You can access them via the link that's included on the slide there. Likewise, PE and sports premium is returning for 23-24 as well. And once again, the updated conditions of grant for that particular funding stream have also been published and again are accessible through the link that you can see there accordingly. On this next slide, the main funding stream I just want to discuss quickly on here is the 40 million additional funding, which as you can see doesn't have any published guidance attached to it as yet. We are expecting guidance to be available on this funding very, very shortly. But just to give you a bit of context behind this, so we have set aside up to 40 million of additional funding for 23-24, and that's to support individual schools that find themselves in particular overall financial difficulties. So this is on top of the 525 million that schools will already be receiving this year through the Teachers Pay Additional Grant, or TPAG, as we refer to it in the SFA. And this is to support with the September 2023 Teachers Pay Award. So the sum of up to 40 million will be used to expand the department's existing support route. It'll be available to academies facing the most difficult financial circumstances and to help local authorities to expand the support they provide to their maintained schools facing the most acute financial pressures. Where schools are in serious financial difficulty, they should contact their local authority or the ESFA as usual, and we can provide advice and assistance on a case-by-case basis. And the other funding grants that are on that slide there, as you can see, which again are new for 23-24, are the early years supplementary grant and also the Teachers Pay Additional Grant, which I just referenced as well, which, as I say, are both kicked in from 23-24. On this final slide, again, recovery premium and national tutoring programme are somewhat more established funding streams now, which you'll probably be familiar with. But the top entry there, which is MPQ Targeted Support Fund, is again a new funding stream that's coming for 23-24. It will be also coming through in 24-25 as well. The main bulk of MPQ Targeted Support funding was paid back in June of 2023. There will be a further sweep-up payment for that particular grant, which is due to be paid at the end of this month. Again, the relevant hyperlink you can see there will give you further information and context about that particular funding stream if you need to understand anything more about it. As I say, those slides just cover very briefly the main funding streams you would expect to see coming in to the sector. As I say, hopefully there's nothing there that causes any immediate surprises to colleagues. But just moving on now into a little bit more detail, if we focus on the main funding, which is the Dedicated Schools Grant. So on this slide here, we've got the main arrangements, which can be summarised as follows. Local authorities will continue to have flexibility to move funding between blocks. So that will mean the ability to transfer up to 0.5% of schools block to another block with the approval of your appropriate schools forum. Movement out of early years block to any other block is also allowed, so long as consultation with the schools forum has taken place and any pass-through rate condition is also satisfied. Movement out of the high needs block to any other block is allowed in consultation with schools forum, in consultation with relevant representatives or subgroups of schools forum, and any providers likely to be affected by the transfer of funding. And movement out of the central services block to the schools block is allowed, again, as long as it's in consultation with your appropriate schools forum. We did hold a local authority workshop last week, which covered the process for disapplications in quite a bit of detail. So for any colleagues that weren't dialed into that session, it has been recorded. And again, the slides have been circulated. So you will have the opportunity to refer back to that session if you need to. For that reason, I'm not going to go into an awful lot of detail here about the disapplications process, just because it is available in that previous session. But I will just reiterate some of the key deadline points around disapplications, which are of relevance here. So a disapplication is required by the 17th of November to ensure that you receive a response by the APT deadline. And that's for disapplications that require movements out of the schools block that are above the 0.5% threshold I referenced earlier, or for any movements out of schools block that do not have the approval of your appropriate schools forum, but where you as a local authority still wish to proceed with that movement. Local authorities also can have the opportunity by the 12th of January to make any amendments to a disapplication request that's been submitted. Amendments, as you can see there, would include demand for high needs provision that might have changed significantly, or where your October 2023 census data differs significantly from expected numbers. Now, what we would say here that isn't mentioned on the slide, just very quickly, is that for any disapplications that are submitted after that 17th of November deadline, we will still endeavour to get those assessed for you and get a decision sought. What we would say, ideally, is that in those circumstances, if you can ensure you complete 2 APTs that are both signed off. One APT would encompass the proposed disapplication request being approved, and the other APT would be on the basis of this application not being approved. And that way it speeds up the APT process for us alongside that, on the basis that this application has been submitted after the deadline. As I say, that's not mentioned on the slide, but it's just an important point to note there. As far as payment arrangements are concerned for this application for DSG, nothing much to report except that the payment instalments are now 13 per year, so 1 per month, with the exception of March, where 2 payments are made. And again, the process is, as has always been the case, whereby chief financial officers are required to submit a signed statement confirming that the conditions of grant have been adhered to. That will obviously continue to be the case going into 24-25 as well. Just to talk around underspends on DSG. So underspends can be carried forward to the next financial year, but with the caveat that it can only be spent on the school's budget. Schools forum should be consulted on the use of any underspend, and forum consent is required where it is used for central budgets. For deficits, the 3 options to carry forward are set below, including carrying forward all of the deficit to set against the school's budget in the next financial year, carry part of the deficit forward to set against the school's budget in the next financial year and carry the rest forward to the following financial year, or not setting any deficit budget against school's budget in the next financial year, but carrying all of the deficit forward to the following financial year. Now, for any part of the deficit carried forward to the next financial year, it is the DSG in that year that must be used to eliminate that deficit. Conversely, any part of the deficit carried forward to the following financial year will need to be recovered from the DSG it receives in that year. Now, Secretary of State consent is required for any local authority that wishes to either use general funds to recover the DSG deficit or to add general funds to its school budget. Now, allocations for 24-25 will be available in December 2023. The schools block will be allocated using the primary and secondary units of funding published in July 2023, multiplied by the number of pupils recorded on the October 23 school census. High needs allocations will be published in July 23, utilising the High Needs National Funding Formula and Basic Entitlement, and include updated high needs pupil numbers from the October 2023 school census. For Central Services Schools block and early years allocations, for CSSB, this will be allocated using the unit of funding for ongoing commitments published in July 23, multiplied by the same pupil numbers from October 23 census used in the schools block. In addition, it will be used historic commitments funding, so we'll apply protection to ensure historic commitments cannot fall below the total value of ongoing termination of employment and prudential borrowing costs. Obviously, there's a key web link there to an inbox to contact, obviously, for any local authorities that are in that particular position. We do expect for early years block that provisional allocations will be published in December 23, as is usually the case. We would just signpost the school's operational guide. So there is a hyperlink at the bottom of the slide there to the 24-25 operational guide. So again, we would recommend colleagues on the call to consult that guide for any further information they do need. And of course, anything that you can't find answered in that guidance, do refer to the ESFA for any inquiries that you do have regarding that. As far as 24-25 updated allocations are concerned, there's just some key dates here to reference and to draw your attention to. So For March 24, schools block and high needs block will be updated for academy conversions, which occurred after November of 2023. In spring 24, high needs block will be updated to reflect the new border data for import and export adjustment. Now, I appreciate spring 24 is a fairly non-specific date, given that we've given specific dates for the other milestones there. I've had some conversations with our high needs colleagues about this. Now, I believe for this year, the high needs block was updated in June. High needs colleagues will endeavour to get the high needs block updated as quickly as they can in the spring of 2024, but the reluctance to give a specific date is just centred around the fact that there is a census cleansing, data cleansing process that takes place, as well as some QAing on the data. And it's because of that process that's in place that there is a reluctance as yet to give a specific date beyond saying spring of 2024. But as soon as we can be more specific on that point, we will communicate that accordingly. For July 24, as you can see there, we've got schools block and high needs block being updated for academy conversions after March 2024, and early years block being updated with latest census data. November of 2024, schools block and high needs block will be updated for academy conversions after July 23. Schools block will be updated for academy conversions after November 23. And schools block high needs block will be updated for academy conversions after February and March of 2025. Early years block will be updated with the latest census data in July of 2025. Now, in terms of the timelines for grant payments that we're going to be paying during 23-24, so the dates for most of the funding streams haven't changed. So again, as you're looking through the slides here, you should find that most of the expected dates you can receive payments should be as has been in the past. As I say, the key change from previous years is DSG, which is now paid in 13 instalments, whereas opposed to previous years, it was paid a little bit more frequently. Just to reiterate again about mainstream schools additional grant, just again, because this is a new funding stream that was introduced in 23-24. So again, you've had your first payment instalment would have been back in the spring, in April of May of this year, and you can expect a further instalment of that funding at the end of this month. So it'll be end of October for local authority maintained schools, and then academies will be paid at the beginning of November accordingly. Again, just because it is a new funding stream, to reiterate, with MPQ Targeted Support Fund, so the initial funding for that was paid in June. As I referenced, there is a sweep-up payment window occurring in October of 2023 for schools that may be missed out on funding from the June window accordingly. And as I say, that funding will return again in 24-25. And at the moment, the expected payment dates are going to be similar. So it'll be June of 2024 when that main bulk of MPQ targeted support funding will be paid next year accordingly. The other grant, just to reference here, so again, Teachers Pay Additional Grant, as we just mentioned, will be paid in October of 23 at the end of this month accordingly. Early Years Careers Framework funding is also a new grant which is being rolled out nationally this year. So it was introduced last year, but only to select local authorities. But from 23-24, it's become a national rollout. The main window, payment window for that grant was back in July of this year. We are targeting November of 2023 to incorporate an additional sweep-up payment window for that grant, again, for relevant schools that may have missed out on funding that occurred back in the summer. And once again, at the moment, the plan is to replicate those funding timelines going into next year as well. So ECF funding will return in 24-25. And again, at the moment, it's expected to follow the same trajectory of a July payment and then potentially a sweeper payment in the autumn accordingly. That basically brings us to a close on the main funding streams that we are paying. As I say, it's a fairly short summary of what to expect